Coding for Gogo began when she sculpted grand dreams onto pottery, crocheted algorithmic patterns onto garments that we grew into. This was the original digital technology, a reflection of our artistic expression. In a world as big as one's imagination, made smaller by tech, we're brought together by clouds and streams, for even networks know the strength of connectivity, as we do the power of human connection. Africans, our imagination ruled the world, by it worlds advanced. New methods demand new forms, so we morphed. From mud huts to skyscrapers, from Morse code to binary code, where coding for girls is not sacrilegious, but said with the same simplicity as a makeup tutorial. Yes, a tomorrow where girls are lining coding like lining makeup, hacking bro codes, breaking barriers. Background has never birthed intelligence and talent, nor be they the DNA of privilege. If you can dream it, you can code it. Debug and refactor with every binary, not restricted by a mouse, keyboard, or data. Be it in a leafy suburb, downtown CBD, or the township. Creativity your currency, your mind a mine. With evolution, the tune never changes. We just dance to it differently. Memory is stored in feeling. This flow is innate. There is no mathematics to the sound. But we have always known this. Rhythm is more in action than in thought, and it's playing out than it's scripting. Some have called it mysticism. I call it the resurrection of our ancestors who art in heaven through our images of unborn things, our words, sensations, song and dance, an embrace of Urban Festival 2020, an embodiment of the ideal.
Hello and good morning, and welcome to this. My name is Duncan Wowo. I am the Program Manager for Well-Governed Cities at the South African Cities Network. And along with Jill Cullinan and Andrew Boraine of the Western Cape Economic Development Partnership, I'd like to thank you for joining us in this Urban Festival session titled Partnering During the Pandemic, Lessons for Building Better Together. This year's Urban Festival theme is Empowering the Civic, an exploration into how the physical and virtual world can be harnessed to engage people in reimagining and shaping their own cities, both in these strange and uncertain COVID-19 pandemic times and into the future. In this complex and changing world, how do we really empower and activate all of society to consciously participate in the transformation of South Africa's cities and towns? There are many interesting governance lessons that have emerged over the past 6 months during the pandemic, where COVID-19 has both revealed the flaws in existing governance systems and exacerbated them. This session will extract broader governance lessons from EDP's experience of convening a food relief forum that resulted in the establishment of new, proactive, and accountable relationships between NGOs, community organizations, and government officials. First of all, let me just start off with some housekeeping. We encourage discussion and participation, and are really looking forward to engaging with all of you today on that. If you can please capture questions at any time using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. And when we have an open discussion session after the presentations in the first section of the session is over, if you can raise your hand once again by clicking on the participants tab at the bottom of your screen, and then that will draw your attention, and then we can call on you to make your contribution. During the presentations in the first half of the session, we encourage you to post into the chat section insights, observations, and comments that we'll also be drawing in on and pulling into the broader conversation later on. If I can ask you to please direct technical questions to the host only, so those can be addressed. Moving on now to the agenda for the session, we have 2 hours between now and 11. And the session is divided into 2. In the first half, we'll watch a brief video clip to set the scene, followed by a presentation from Andrew and Jill on the governance lessons from the NGO Government Food Relief Forum, and then followed by a presentation from me in which I situate those lessons within a broader governance framework. We'll then go to a 5-minute comfort break and return for the second half of the session, when we'll engage in a discussion with all of you on this call on building effective partnerships between the state and society. We very much encourage discussion and engagement and look forward to talking with you. If I can just ask my colleague Lebo to play the video clip, please. If you bear with us, it takes a little while to queue up, I think, with the larger files.
What is your name? My name is Mzikona Mkele. I am affiliated with a number of organizations. I'm also a member for Cape Town Together, admin person for Langa Ken Community Action Network. I've been with Open Streets Cape Town for 5 years, trying to make streets accessible for everyone equally, public spaces to be owned by people, cars to share with bicycles on the streets. Also with Langa Bicycle Hub, a hub which is focusing on non-motorized transport as a form of bicycles in our narrow roads, where we try and get more women and children on bicycles. It has been challenging to work on the ground, organizing or self-organizing on the ground in the community. A lot of division, a lot of segregation, a lot of misconfused information about resources, about opportunities and equal change. So my impact would be there has been a lot of shift in making things happen, where people are taking initiatives to make things possible for themselves, to get resources accessible without red tape or policies. There has been a huge change with the self-organizing movements like the Cape Town Together, where the second pandemic has been a challenge, but people are joining forces to make sure that community established kitchens are serving the community, because most of people are unemployed. The positive impact is that people are working together. COVID has taught us a way of making sure that people are checking on each other, making sure that people are accessible to work as a collective. Participating in the food forum, there has been a lot of benefit. I mean, like the vouchers that we get, the resources that we get so that we can fight the second pandemic, which is hunger or food. We have tried to make a system that is working, whereby many people opened up their community kitchens, home-based kitchens, which are now landmarks for people to access food, for people to queue, long, long lines, and bedridden people, where we also deliver with bicycles. So many things that the government can learn from people, so many things that the community can learn from the government. There is a huge gap whereby there is this red line still, where paperwork is binding so many people. Many people are falling through the tracks with the resources. Some of the things now in nowadays, they should be accessible. Yeah. Some of the things like community gardening, food security, a collective. Participating in the food forum, there has been a lot of benefit. I mean, like the vouchers that we get, the resources that we get so that we can fight the second pandemic, which is hunger or food. We have tried to make a system that is working, whereby many people opened up their community kitchens, home-based kitchens, which are now landmarks for people to access food, for people to queue long lines, and bedridden people, where we also deliver with bicycles. So many things that the government can learn from people, so many things that the community can learn from the government. There is a huge gap whereby there is this red line still, where paperwork is binding so many people. Many people are falling through the cracks with the resources. Some of the things now in nowadays, they should be accessible. Yeah. Some of the things like community gardening, food security, access to public transport, access to bicycles, access to 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 recreation centers, city parks. Like there are still some barriers because the community, people want to take change, and when it comes to food, when it comes to
Thank
right
you,
information,
Lebo. I think that's the clip is
sanitizers, masks.
looping there. Great. Thank you for that. I think you'll have seen that that's a member of the group who, in fact, the EDP have been working with closely, speaking to the community experience of dealing with issues around food security during the pandemic. With that said, I think I'd like to call on Andrew and Jill to give us a brief presentation of the lessons that they've learned during this experience.
Thanks, Tanga. And good morning, everyone. And we're just going to wait till we get the presentation up from Lebo, and then I'll kick it off. But great to see everyone on this call, and thank you very much for participating. Lebo, can we get the presentation up, please?
Sure, just getting it up for you guys.
Thank you.
Can you all see the screen?
Yes, maybe just put it on full, there we go. There we go. Okay, well, good morning again, everyone. The theme of this urban festival is empowering the civic. And this morning, we're going to be focusing specifically on the relationship or relationships between government and civil society. So we're zooming in on a very particular aspect of governance. We're going to be drawing, Jill and I will be co-presenting, and we are drawing on lessons from two partnering processes that we were involved in, or still are involved in during the pandemic. One is the convening of a food forum which coordinated relief. And secondly, our involvement at a more grassroots or operational level with community kitchens and community recovery programs. And Jill is going to describe that in more detail. And we've been reflecting on what was done differently during the crisis. In other words, driven by the urgent needs of the crisis. Where did civil society act differently, and where did government act differently? And can we learn from the way in which people were able to act differently, in other words, behave out of the normal, and build that into our post-pandemic practices rather than returning to the, in a sense, bad old business as usual relationships between government and civil society, which I would suggest is characterized by government being fairly inward-looking, or typically inward-looking, fairly top-down in their approach to civil society, quite suspicious of or mistrustful of and disempowering of civil society organizations, typically quite unresponsive to ideas and actions coming from communities, and largely able to not deal with informality in a fairly low trust environment. So we saw something different during the crisis, and what lessons can we learn from that? And I just want to say, as part of the introduction, we've based our practice, or we base our practice on the concept of adaptive governance, which is defined as the ability to deal with complex societal issues involving many stakeholders with diverging interests rather than converging, where there's a lot of uncertainty about the actions to be taken. And we believe that adaptive governance enhances governments or a government's capacity to deal with change and build relationships with non-government sectors. And in a sense, it's the opposite or the antithesis of existing public sector planning, monitoring, evaluation, and compliance systems. So I'm not going to go into the background story to the Food Forum itself. The report is available on the EDP website, and I'm going to put it on the chat. And hopefully, if you want to download the report, maybe it's not, the link is not coming through, we will certainly do it. Or maybe, Jenny, you can put it up on the chat and link people to it. Just to say that the Food Forum was established during the third week of the lockdown. And we, in setting it up, we drew on lessons that we had learned in the Western Cape, in Cape Town, from the Cape Town Day Zero drought about 2 or 3 years ago. And the Food Forum was built around three C's. How do we help people in a crisis to connect? How do we help people to communicate well? Because there's often a lot of false or fake information flowing around during the panic of a crisis. And then most importantly of all, how do we help people to work together, to collaborate, and to partner? And that approach is set up there on the slide. And I just want to single out the two last points, the two last bullets there. We focused in setting up this forum on developing 3 sets of relationships there. In other words, what was happening between civil society organizations themselves, between NGOs, the big food NGOs, the intermediaries, the micro or grassroots NGOs. Secondly, between civil society on the one hand and government. And then thirdly, within government. And one of the themes that we want to bring out here is that if government doesn't get its act together in what we would call a whole of government approach, it makes it doubly difficult for whole of society approaches to work. Because if government is at 6s and 7s, if the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing in terms of the silos, the spheres, the sectors within government, it's very hard for the public sector to partner well with non-government stakeholders like civil society or business or academics and research or donors and things like that. And then the last bullet point there refers to building relationships of trust enduring beyond the crisis. And this is certainly what we found out during or after the response to the water crisis. People reverted pretty much back to their normal silos, and in a sense weren't able to build in many cases on the relationships of trust. And so we were determined to try and change that through this particular crisis. Okay, Lebo, can we get the next slide, please? So what were the results of the forum? And again, I won't go through all of these points. I'm just going to highlight 2 or 3. But, obviously, the main result was that civil society stepped up and was able to mount an incredible effort in Cape Town and the Western Cape around feeding people, families, individuals, organizations in poor and vulnerable areas. And we noted in our data that civil society organizations provided over 5.2 million what we call person days of food relief over the first 4 months of the crisis. That includes during the hard lockdown. Now, this is a unit that we developed, just to explain this without getting too much onto the food relief data side of things. It's a unit that measures quantities of food as numbers of days that would feed a single adult. And this is different from total number of people fed, which is obviously much higher, but it does allow comparison between different categories of food relief, between food parcels, for example, meals, vouchers, and bulk donations. The point we just want to make here is that civil society mounted a very impressive effort to complement what government was doing and deliver food relief to poor and vulnerable areas. I think the two things that came out through the forum is that we were able to demonstrate and communicate the value of civil society, the responsiveness, the flexibility of doing things differently during a crisis. And certainly provincial and local government in the Western Cape sat up and took notice. And so it had that desired effect. The second point is that it raised broader societal awareness of the issue of food insecurity and poor nutrition. And I think it's a truism to say, but it needs to be repeated, that the pandemic didn't cause the food crisis. It exacerbated it, it added to it, but it didn't cause it. Prior to COVID-19 in Cape Town, in the Western Cape, we've had severe lack of access to nutritious food. And even after the pandemic, that problem will still persist. So what are we going to do? And how do we move from food relief in the short term during a crisis, which is not sustainable indefinitely, to more equitable and more just food systems where people get better nutrition? What Mzi in the video clip that you saw just now called the second pandemic. Thanks, Lebo. Can we move on? So just a few notes about what made the Food Forum work. It helped having predictability and consistency amidst the uncertainty, because a crisis breeds a lot of uncertainty. So having the Food Forum on a regular basis, always at the same time, meetings were business-like, ran to time, I think brought in a measure of stability into the process of connecting, communicating, and collaborating. We encouraged everyone to contribute to the agenda. It didn't come just from government or just from civil society. It was a shared agenda. And we really focused on action. And I think this it is what we'd call an adaptive approach. Rather than waiting for the perfect plan, the perfect set of data, we encouraged everyone from government to civil society just to act, step into action rather than wait for the plan. And at the same time, while you're engaging in action, to regularly reflect, evaluate, learn, adapt, and adjust the plans. And that's the spirit in which we approached the Food Forum. We were quite proud, we are quite proud of the speedy communications. Pretty much without exception, we generated a full report for each meeting by the same day as the meeting. And then when people who attended the forum agreed to do something to follow it up, as soon as they communicated that, we sent that out to everyone so that there was a measure of accountability for performance and action and follow-up in the forum. And the final point I just emphasize is that we didn't try and centralize everything. And often we find many community forums or community government forums can be a little bit gatekeeperish. They tend to want to centralize all actions. And we made a point of encouraging the members of the forum, and there were probably about 180 people participating in this forum differentially over the 4 months, representing probably between up to 100 NGOs and then Western Cape Government and City of Cape Town. We said, don't try and do everything via the forum. Make direct contact with everyone and partner directly with whoever you need to. Don't let the forum become a bottleneck. And I think that helped the process as well. Thanks, Lebo. And my final point is going back to what was happening within government. I think it helped enormously that in this particular case, the Western Cape government convened what it called its own Humanitarian Cluster Committee, which was a whole of government approach within government. And they pulled together 7 provincial government departments. They brought in national government, the City of Cape Town, and the 5 district municipalities. And that meant when officials from provincial government attended the forum, they spoke with one voice They knew what was happening back in government. They could coordinate action back into government. They could talk to their colleagues. And that meant civil society didn't have to deal individually with social development or Department of Education or Department of the Premier or Department of Local Government in a kind of confusing way. So just to stress, to get whole of society working, you need to get whole of government working, creating partnerships within and between public sector institutions. And then attitudes and behaviors. It's the so-called soft stuff, which is often the hardest. We noticed that government officials participating in the forum did so in an open, engaged, and non-defensive manner. When they came there and they didn't know the answers, they said, we don't know. We will go and find out for you and we'll come back. And these attitudes and behaviors hugely assisted the process of trust building. And I think we can take those sort of lessons into the future. Thanks, Jill. Over to you.
Thanks, Andrew. Morning, everybody. I'd like to start off by mentioning two projects that we've worked on as examples of ways of working together. And the first one is called the Community Kitchens Initiative, and it came about as a result of a pilot project that Western Cape government was doing in series with the DG Murray Trust around sending digital vouchers to community kitchens, and that pilot wasn't taken forward. So the EDP partnered with the DG Murray Trust and Cape Town together to set up a fund made up through private donations to send 1,000 Rand weekly food vouchers via cell phone to community kitchen organizers. And Cape Town together had identified kitchens via the community action networks, and the EDP verified the kitchens and compiled a database of 110 community kitchens, and the project supported them for 6 months. It's just come to an end now. The idea was to send the vouchers and the kitchen organizers could buy nutritional food to support the kitchen. And some of the lessons that came out of this project is it really takes time and resources to work in this way. Relationships are essentially what matters, and you need to set up a reliable single contact point person with a backup, because you can't ever drop the ball when you're dealing with a group like this. You need regular, clear, reliable communication. People need to know what's happening, when vouchers are going to be sent, how and where they can be redeemed. And a big lesson was about the digital divide, and that you can't make any assumptions. You know, we set up a WhatsApp group. Not everybody has WhatsApp. Not everyone has data. You can't set a deadline for redemption that's too short, because people need to arrange for transport to shops. And it really worked because we were working with community-based organizations and kitchens on the ground. So that project, we dispersed those vouchers, has come to an end. As a result of that project, Western Cape government wanted to try something new. So we spoke with them and they put in some funding, 2 million, and the DG Murray Trust put in funding to do a similar project, but with a bit of a spin. And this was really to support the local economy via the community kitchen spending at local food suppliers and sparzas. So now what we're doing is we're sending, again, 1,000 Rand vouchers to 225 community kitchens every 2 weeks to be redeemed at sparzas and food suppliers. The funding won't allow us to do it in every COVID hotspot across the Western Cape, so we've just chosen some areas. And another lesson is the kitchen organizers can buy electricity and data as well as food. So the lessons emanating from this project have included building on what we learned from the first project, just to make sure that we spend enough time on the relationships and the communication. The technology sounds like it'll be perfectly foolproof, and it is not. it's extremely important to deal with technological issues as they arise, because the people receiving the vouchers need to know that when they get to the checkout till, they're not going to be told the voucher isn't working for some reason after they've specially organized transport, arranged the shopping trip. You know, we have to protect the beneficiaries and allow them to use the system with dignity and choice about where they shop. We've also found that some beneficiaries ignore digital SMS messaging and don't really believe that a voucher is redeemable because they get so many phishing messages. But what we found that this project works because all the partners, the beneficiaries, ourselves, DG and Western Cape Government, work collaboratively to solve problems as they arise. And this is critical. There's no blame. If something comes up, we try and find a solution immediately. And the other huge lesson is working with informality. We have to adjust our ways of communicating and measuring impact. So Western Cape Government had one idea of how they were going to measure impact of the project, and we've had to revise that completely. So out of this, we've really seen the value of a crisis, because all the stakeholders have been motivated to do things differently to make sure that it works. The emphasis is on taking action rather than processes. Everything is faster, smoother, because we're working better together. We value each other more, and that sort of trust and giving people the benefit of the doubt really reaps dividends. We're far more open and collaborative. And as I said, we're not blaming each other, we're trying to find solutions. Officials have interpreted public sector regulations in a way that gets things done, able to support rather than just monitor. And I think that critically, the crisis has made community efforts visible. So really, for the first time, government is seeing the value of all the work that's being done on the ground. So the thing to watch out for is that a return to the previous pre-crisis business as usual approach is a danger, and it's tempting because people default back to what they know. So we need to address the impact of the pandemic and how do we do things differently? How do we build together better? And the forum is a space in which people have been trying to find ways to shift beyond food relief to sustainable and equitable food and nutrition systems. So we have 6 propositions for working differently and building on what we have learned through the crisis. And the first 2 really go together. The first 2 about working as partners in order to enable one's own work as well as your partner's work. And there needs to be a shift from a public sector community engagement approach, which is about ticking the boxes in a standard step-by-step methodology, whereby public citizens are invited to comment on government action, rather than co-planning and co-designing and co-implementing and co-prioritizing. And also, government should focus on how much it can support and enable community-led recovery ideas and actions as on delivering its own. So this takes time to find the opportunities for convergence and how one can work together collaboratively. What I'd like to do is stop there and invite Andrew and Danga to comment on these first 2 before I go on to the next one. Andrew?
Thanks, Jill. Well, to come in here very quickly, we've seen in preparation for the recovery plans of government is typically preoccupied with their own budgets and projects and mandates, and is seldom stopping to listen to what civil society organizations are already doing. And the point is that civil society organizations are not waiting around for government plans. They have their own ideas and actions, be they good, bad, or indifferent. And how do we encourage officials and politicians to take a while and to pause and stop their own planning just to listen deeply. I think that's what this means. And then once you've listened, to then work out, well, how do you support and enable community-led development rather than just government projects? And the analogy I draw is, for years now, the municipal local economic development departments have been very familiar with the concepts of reducing red tape or ease of doing business. This is well established for the private sector and for the market. So can we not apply this to something about ease of doing development with communities or reducing red tape for civil society organizations? Using that language, but in terms of the relationship between particularly local government and community development, and rather than just local government and the business community.
Thanks, Andrew. Danga?
Thanks, Jill. I think what you, addressing that first point about shifting the traditional public sector community engagement approach, I think we need to perhaps dig a little deeper and look back to, what exactly was envisioned in terms of developmental local government. I think the Local Government White Paper of 1998 laid out the vision for what that would mean. And I think the engagement at that time, and perhaps Andrew can speak to this as well, as having one of the people who was very much involved in the local government sector at that time, is I think community engagement as envisioned hasn't quite taken place. And I think for two reasons. I think the first one is the amount of time required. Perhaps I think, and Andrew has hinted at this, which is that I think government sort of gets on with its things because they have, a financial year that they're operating within. Of course, the NGOs and others do as well, but that, the particular deliverables associated with a year, their plans associated with that. And I think they then become so inwardly focused on what it is that they have to do, what their key performance indicators may be within their, as individuals, and then also as departments, number one. But then the broader question, I think, is that what exactly does that view of what government is actually supposed to be. And I think this is something that perhaps Andrew could comment on as well, which is that government it is very much a statist approach to development in the country. I think it's fair to say that most left-leaning revolutionary movements see themselves as vanguard parties, and so they're leading the people. And what's very interesting is that post-1994, the community activism, the quite active level of civic engagement from the community disobedience during the last years of the apartheid struggle that led to the state of emergency, United Democratic Front. So there were large civic formations that were, it has been said by many commentators, were actually disabled after 1994, because you have now a government that's come in which has a very statist approach. They've thought through the answers. They are quote unquote intellectuals who have thought through all these big things, and they will deliver this better life for you for all. And I think whether intentionally or not, that disempowered civil society and disempowered the engagement, although it was written about, but I think really in people's minds, they weren't really intending to engage in that way. And I'll just leave that comment there for now.
Thanks, Danga. So the next proposition is that informality needs to be acknowledged. And as you've said earlier, Andrew, the red tape around many government processes is disempowering and means that many people can't participate at all. So the regulatory environment does make it difficult for government to channel resources to organizations that are not formalized and registered in that way. And we've seen this in Cape Town with the mayoral relief funding proposal that went out recently. So the majority of the community organization initiatives that we see, the kitchens, the gardens, etc., are informal and unregistered, and therefore they are not acknowledged and undervalued. So can I invite Andrew and Danga to comment on this one?
Jill, thanks. I mean, government rightly has strict rules for allocation of public resources because of state capture and corruption and nepotism. So we don't want to undermine that. But what do community organizations need most of all? I mean, if you want to run a food garden successfully, you need access to land. If you want to organize in the community, you need access to premises. These are often available within the municipality, but it's very hard for unregistered and unacknowledged or unregistered organizations to contract with the state. It's just almost impossible. And even in the typical municipal grant and aid, Jill, that you referred to, I mean, there are so many forms that have to be complied with and filled in that even the most experienced and hardened large NGOs with strong administration and governance structures can barely register. What we tried to do, so I mean, how do we get around this? Because I think that system, that rather frozen system within the public sectors is not going to change in the short term. If anything, to try and stop state capture and plundering, it's going to get more restrictive and more compliance-based in the near future. So what we've tried to look at is where larger and better resourced and more formalized and registered NGOs that are familiar with the local government system can in turn form partnerships with the unregistered and the informal, so that there is in a sense, an intermediation in the relationship between the government, the rather rigid government systems around resource allocation in communities, and the informal sector. And we think that this is a very important theme to pursue over the next 2 to 3 years.
Thanks, Andrew. Danga?
I think Andrew raises a very important point, which is that I think also in this understanding of what community engagement might well look like, and perhaps there was an oversight of the fact that it is generally difficult to engage with government. I mean, I think even people who have been service providers, as I say, who have been service providers as white collar knowledge workers, if you will, to be registered on the government database, there's a large amount of documentation and so on that you need. And this is people who specialize in doing this. So I do think that this intermediary role that Andrew's pointing out is really, really valuable and really useful. And it's similar and it parallels the social facilitation role, for example, that's been advanced for communities to have social facilitation processes within projects that are on the IDP for them to engage with government and engage with practitioners in the course of those projects. But also I'd like to return to this question of informality more generally. And I think, I mean, there's a compelling argument that's been made by various people that to create change in a society, it's not at the surface level in terms of the rules and the regulations and things that seem quite obvious, but actually the most meaningful change in a society comes from addressing some of the myths that underpin some of those assumptions that are unspoken, that are not necessarily voiced, but are actually informing the action of all of us within a society and within a system. And I'd like to address that myth around informality, because I think it's fair to say that for whatever reason, and probably I think because of the particular kind of colonialism of a particular type that happened in South Africa, is that the Weberian approach to bureaucratic organization has always seen informality as a problem. Now, this has been the case across colonies on the continent, but I think if you were to look at how South Africans, how we view informality versus to how Africans across the rest of the continent view informality, is very different. Informality is an African thing. It's the way it is. And I think this antipathy towards informality, I think, informs this myth, as I say, underlying that there's something wrong, inherently wrong with not having a formal structure with, ESTD 1887 on the door, that you've been engaging with the community since then. And that individuals are entrepreneurs, and in informal settings, in the normal setting that the majority of Africans live in, they just make a plan. And I think that is something that we need to also include in our discussions when we talk about informality and our attitude and our view towards it.
Thanks, Danga. So the fourth proposition is really that we reassess what we value, because we measure what we value. And this is about the monitoring and evaluation systems that really determine where government officials put their energy and their time. So relationship building really matters and needs to be valued and measured accordingly. Andrew and Danga?
Well, nowhere in the current sort of government planning, monitoring, and evaluation system and indicators are relationships acknowledged, let alone valued and measured as part of the process. That's the difficulty. Government systems or public sector systems typically measure the outputs or the quantities, and more value for money as government effectively runs out of money and moves towards austerity. So there's a huge reduction of everything to so-called value for money. And processes, because you can't build relationships without investing in a process. Process is equated with delay. Delay is equated with time, and time is equated with money. So in a sense, government austerity approach is trying to almost drive process of relationship building and trust building out of the system. And I think that that's going to hugely undermine the effectiveness of government projects and government spend, because ultimately, if it's not built on a willing and trusting relationship with the community, with civil society organizations, and with other sectors, academics, scientists, journalists, the private sector, I mean, these are relationships that governance, which is a two-way process, needs to be based on, rather than just ruling through government. And it's going back to the basic notion of two-way accountability is at the heart of governance. And Danga, you referred to the Constitution, you referred to the legislation. I mean, uniquely in South Africa, a municipality it consists of three things. A municipality consists of the political level, the administrative level, and the community of that municipality. It doesn't just talk about the administrative structure and the political structure. And over time, that tripartite agreement between community and civil society, the political level, and administration has been severed. And I think we've got to rebuild it on the basis of what our constitution and our law stipulates around the idea of local government being very, very close and being of the community.
Thanks, Andrew. I mean, I think I would very much agree with you and support that point. And I think, and once again, I think this goes back to this statist view, which you pointed out seems to have sort of sunk into how we view and how we see the local sphere. And particularly because development of local government, I mean, it is the coalface. This is where most of us, the majority of citizens, interact with government on a daily basis in the local sphere. That whether it's through our electricity bill, our water bill, water and sanitation, and so on. Our most direct experiences, and frequently on a daily basis, is with things that fall within the functions of local government. But I'd also like to add to, I think your statement there that we measure what we value is incredibly important, because, and as you've pointed out, Andrew, is that we tend to measure inputs and outputs and processes, but we're not necessarily measuring outcomes. So if you were to say, for example, the electoral slogan, "A better life for all," that is an outcome. I think it's a normative outcome that but we're not necessarily measuring that. And I think for whatever reason, and the regulations have tended towards, and there's been criticism of what might be seen as an audit approach to measuring local government. So, for example, when we have the annual report from the Auditor General, he leads off with whether municipalities or provinces got clean audits, which I think reflects some of this measurement of inputs and outputs. And it's not to say that those things aren't important, but I think sometimes, and perhaps this is precisely because we have omitted the role of the community, as you say, in that tripartite agreement, because I can guarantee the community would not necessarily be as concerned about those things if they felt they're not achieving this better life for all that they were hoping for, despite the fact that perhaps on the other side, it would be asserted that, but you're living in a community which has a clean audit, you should be happy. This is all that matters.
Thanks, Danga. So the fifth proposition is that intermediary organizations can play a role. What we found in the food forum work is that EDP is not a food expert team. We played a role in convening and organizing sustained collaboration between government and civil society and other sectors, private sector as well. So this is an important role in facilitating conversation. Any thoughts, Danga?
Well, I think just to support that point, I mean, I think from your experience as intermediaries, organizations, I think this is something that needs to be examined further. And I think this is one of the key lessons that we could share. I mean, I did hint at social facilitation as being a parallel to an intermediary organizations. And I think perhaps it's, in fact, particularly because we've come to this point now where I think it's fair to say that the community engagement, community participation model seems to be broken, that there's an even greater role now for really intermediary organizations to step into this space, into this vacuum, based on their experience and based on their learnings, and to share those between these two partners, you know, the state and society, who seem to have forgotten how to speak to each other.
Thank you. Andrew?
Jill, I think there's a couple of pointers here, because I think that this in-between space has become a very important space within the world of doing development differently. It's in between the state and civil society organizations and the market and research and academia. And it deliberately focuses on that liminal in-between space, because I think that that's where you deal with difference and you mediate and navigate difference. And what are the characteristics? I mean, any organization can play that role. But I think it helps if you are firstly independent and you see different sides of the story, that you can play a kind of translation service, because the language of government and the language of communities and the language of business and the language of academia is often at odds or unintelligible to other sectors. I think it helps to be able to navigate two very complex environments. One is what we'd call the top-down authorizing environment of government, which is really complex and never behaves as it ought to on paper. It has a life and a culture, institutional culture of its own. But similarly, the bottom-up mobilizing environment of community organizations, particularly in the informal sector, is also equally complex and needs to be navigated and connected and tied together and things like that. I think a good intermediary organization is one that is flexible and responsive and can move very quickly. You can't do that if you're quite a bureaucratic organization. And I think the sort of capabilities that intermediaries develop is firstly a sets of intelligences, what I'd call emotional, social, and relationship intelligence, and also about change making and taking people with you, helping people see that change is necessary, that the change on the table is going to be effective, and above all, that the change is fair. Because one of the reasons where change often is blocked and doesn't happen and people retreat into corners is they feel somehow, rightly or wrongly, that they or their group or their organization or their sector or their community or their neighborhood is being treated unfairly compared to someone else in the system. And making change depends on helping people to see that the process of change is fair. And that's the stuff of intermediary organizations and intermediary leadership.
Thanks, Andrew. The sixth proposition, and there will be many more, I'm sure, emanating from our discussion later. The sixth one we have here is COVID really showed us that because of physical distancing, the digital divide, and it's grown even greater. So CSOs need to be specifically empowered to participate in engagements through access to data and connectivity. I think this is a critical one. Danga, any thoughts on this one?
Yes, absolutely. Data must fall. I mean, I think that's the only response I can come back with. I mean, I think and to be quite honest, and when you look at the cost of data in Kenya, in Tanzania, in other African countries which are actually poorer than South Africa, it actually is it's unacceptable that this issue has not been addressed with greater urgency. It really is a key source of inequality, access to data and access to the internet and so on. So really, I mean, it's as I say, I mean, I think it. Yeah, I don't suppose I can say more than just saying it is incredibly important.
Now, Andrew?
Well, Jill, it was terrible when you convene a forum and you encourage grassroots participation, and the first sector that is unable to participate is the grassroots community sector, because they can't get access to the Zoom call. Their data is used up. They're using an old cell phone, desperately trying to connect and engage with these processes that are whizzing along. And it's incredibly disempowering. And what we found in building into the community kitchens approach and the community recovery project is that it's not just food that people need. They need data and access to a good Wi-Fi system to communicate, to organize, to mobilize, to educate each other, and to fully participate in the processes. And this was weakened by the pandemic and the distancing and the no longer getting access to physical meetings with government or fellow NGOs, but having to rely on the digit. I mean, for example, municipality, the first thing they did in response to COVID was to close all the libraries in communities. It's understandable that during a hard lockdown. But that's where half of community activists went every day to get access to the Wi-Fi system, certainly in Cape Town. So they were hugely disadvantaged by those library systems, Wi-Fi systems closing down. So we have to build in a very strong access to data and connectivity policy.
Thanks, Andrew. So that's it from me. Danga, over to you.
Great. Many thanks, Jill, for leading us through that discussion and presentation. And what I will do now is, you will have heard clearly we've been hinting at various elements of governance, quote unquote, issues that we have raised. And I will do now is present some of those broader governance questions. So to situate some of the issues that we've raised within a broader governance framework. Lebo, if I can ask you to bring up my presentation, please.
Just give me 2 seconds. I'm just loading it up quickly.
And if you could just put it to the full screen.
Oh, can you see it?
Yes, I think it's a couple of slides. Yeah, okay, great, thanks. The South African Cities Well-Governed Cities program considers how South African cities are governed. And we look at a number of key issues, focusing on institutional strength and capacity, on financial management, on administrative, but also driven by really an overarching question, which is whether the political and institutional context is stable, open, and dynamic enough to accommodate the varied objectives and interests within society. Next slide, please, Lema. And urban governance is, we understand, as the various ways in which power is exercised in cities by the multiple stakeholders and actors who make up the urban space. Government is the vehicle through which societal interests are pursued, while governance refers more broadly to the multiplicity of arrangements between elected leaders, societal actors, and service providers that make up the system. So we understand governance, therefore, consisting of both governing through bureaucratic systems and processes, and also managing competing public and private interests and stakeholders through political processes, as we've heard in the description of the whole of society approach in the presentation earlier. And the efficacy of governance is measured by the quality of local services and institutions, the democratic participation of local citizens and communities in policymaking, and the accountability of elected and public representatives. Excuse me, I just need to check my power connection. Now, if you move on to the next slide, please, Lebo, the Sscn governance framework. We look at governance across four broad dimensions, which are the capability of the state, cooperative governance, and the all of society approach, which the EDP refers to as the whole of society approach, as you've heard earlier, the political administrative interface, and public integrity. I'll go into greater detail on all of those so you can understand what we mean by them. Next slide, please, Lebo. Starting first with cooperative governance. South Africa has three distinct and interconnected spheres of government, national, provincial, and local. And these spheres and the idea of cooperative governance is that it refers to the consultation, the communication, the coordination, collaboration, partnership, and most of all, the avoidance of conflict that the Constitution prescribes between these three interconnected spheres. You may well have heard of the term intergovernmental relations. That also refers to the institutional, the political, and the financial arrangements for interaction among the different spheres of government. And most importantly, cooperative governance implies not just cooperation, but collaboration. So actively working together as three spheres of government to achieve the ends of government. Next slide, please, Lebo. The all of society approach. The 1998 Local Government White Paper argues that without the capacity to strategize, integrate, and interface with non-municipal groups and interests, innovative new approaches to the traditional functions exercised by local government administrations are unlikely to be sustainable. And this is something that you will have heard during the earlier presentation, is innovation. One of the things that the whole of society approach emphasizes and strengthens because of the trust that's built up, because of the relationships, because of the close interaction as equal partners in a relationship. Therefore, it also encourages for innovative approaches from government and also from civil society to achieve some of the developmental outcomes that we seek within society. Cities are reigned and shaped by a range of actors, including communities, the public and the private sectors, and learning institutions. And so the whole of society approach, the all of society approach really is about the engagement, the participation, the collaboration of stakeholders across spheres and sectors of government, in the private sector, in non-profit organizations, ordinary citizens themselves, local community organizations, and sector interest groups. Next slide, please, Lebo. The political administrative interface, I think this is probably the simplest and most obvious, refers to the interactions between the municipal administration and council, made up of councillors representing political parties. Next slide, please, Lebo. And by public integrity, we use the definition provided by the OECD where, and I quote, public integrity refers to the consistent alignment of and adherence to shared ethical values, principles, and norms for upholding and prioritizing the public interest over private interests in the public sector. Now, all those three elements, cooperative governance, the all of society approach, the political administrative interface, and public integrity, really come together in looking at the fourth pillar. Next slide, please, Lebo, which speaks to the capability of the state. If all those three elements are working well, then the state is able to both generate policies and implement them effectively. So we've often spoken in South Africa, and it's fairly well known, that the state has very good at generating policies and indeed has progressive policies building on the constitution, which is globally famous for being a progressive constitution. The challenge has been in implementing many of those wonderful policies that we have. So the strategic capacity to assess and plan and develop innovative programs to meet local needs is very important. And we seem to be fairly good at doing that, but I think the whole of society approach is one way to strengthen that process. but also the state needs the integrating capacity to coordinate and integrate inputs from inside and outside the administration to ensure developmental outcomes. As Andrew was mentioning earlier, it's not just about collaboration between the state and society, but even within the state itself. Cooperative governance, arguably, itself does not reflect the cooperation that we'd like to see. If a frequent criticism of administrations is that they work within silos, then clearly even within municipal administrations, cooperating across departments can be a challenge. And so clearly the capability of the state has been hampered in many ways by some of the deficits in the whole of society approach that we happen to be discussing today. Thanks, Lebo. Well, that brings us to the end of the first hour of the presentation. My colleague, Jenny, has been capturing our discussions visually and was going to share that with us. I don't know, Jenny, if you're ready to do that, or you'd perhaps like to do it after we come back from our comfort break.
Yes, that's fine. Let me pull that up now.
Thanks. Thank you. Thank you, Jenny. I think that captures much of what we have been discussing in this first section. So speaking about partnering during the pandemic, we have spoken to the disempowerment, the effective disempowerment of the civic, and the importance of relationships in the whole of society approach. I think it'd be fair to say the critical importance of relationships within that. And it is through relationships, as we all know, even from our own personal experiences, that trust underpins successful relationships. And it is through that collaboration, through the engagement. I think one point that struck me was hearing that the Food Forum had a shared agenda. Just something as simple as that is engaging and agreeing on a shared agenda, so it's not dictated by one party or the other, enables that kind of co-partnership and relationship between partners that builds on trust. And we have also spoken of moving from ending silos in government, both within government, but also between spheres of government, and also extending that to the wider society, and emphasizing the need for government collaboration and support, both with and in between the informal sector and civil society, more organized civil society bodies as well. And also that community-led interventions, communities know what they want, communities know what they lead. And I think that we are advocating for a less status approach, a less status view on the state having all the answers, the state having all the capacity to do everything, when in fact, as the pandemic has shown us, this is not necessarily the case. And then in order for these programs to succeed, the co-design element for administrators, for practitioners, and for their interlocutors in society to co-design programs that are once again community-led and therefore accurately directed to the needs of the community. So it is now 10 minutes after 10. If we take a 5-minute comfort break and come back then at 10:15, we will continue our discussions and we'll move into a discussion session where we'd like to engage all of you with the content that we've shared with you, and to get your ideas and your opinions, and hopefully some ideas also that we can take forward as we think about the whole of society approach. So thanks very much, and see you in 5 minutes at 10:15. Welcome back. It's now 1:15 and we're ready for the second portion. Thank you. I hope you were able to stretch and get your thinking caps on to engage in a discussion for the next half of the session. Or rather, we're left with 45 minutes. So what we will be doing is we really do encourage engagement. I see that some of you have already posted questions in the Q&A and also in the chat. We will be directing those to those of us on the call, but also you can please continue to do so as we go into this discussion session, and looking forward to engaging with all of your inputs. First of all, we would like to start with a poll to just get some sense of what people on the call are thinking about food security, their experience of what food insecurity has been. That poll is now on screen. If you would please answer that question. So what are the main challenges to collaboration between government and civic organizations? And we've asked you to please select two options rather. The second question is, have you supported organizations aimed at curbing food insecurity? The third question is, what do you think are the main challenges to reducing food insecurity in South Africa? And if you do not see an option that resonates with you, if you could please type it in the chat. Thank you. We are going to be aggregating, my colleague Kayla will be aggregating those responses, and we will bring them to you as we proceed. So first of all, to get us started, I did see a question in the chat from Abby Godsell, which was, has the research revealed what causes the extreme silos, I'm assuming within government, and what systems, policies, and practices in government perpetuate this? Andrew, could I ask you to address that question, please?
So it's slightly different at the municipal level than at provincial and national level, in that, for example, in provincial departments, each one is headed by a separate accounting officer who's personally and individually liable for any audit that is not clean. And so that really reinforces the siloism if that accounting officer is unable to step out of his or her straitjacket of being the accounting officer for the budget and the staff and the mandate of their particular department and step into a more transversal or cross-cutting role with their colleagues. At a municipal level, it theoretically should be easier because executive directors are not accounting officers. The municipal manager is the accounting officer and theoretically should be playing a much more cross-cutting role. It doesn't always happen, but I think one has to look at some of the structural reasons for siloism. But ultimately, Danga, it's not just structural or legal or technical, it's cultural. The institutional cultures take on a life of silos, take on a life of their own. And even within a department, you will get units operating as silos against their own colleagues, almost undermining each other's projects. It's quite terrifying. And that is because I think that the culture of the public sector tends to be inward focused and upwards focused, and is only accountable to political parties and Auditor General. There's no sense of accountability downwards to more grassroots levels and outwards, outside of the institutions. So people roam the corridors of power usually not engaging much with the outside world for months at a time. And we've found, in terms of the culture, for example, if you're head of department, if you have set up a meeting, let's say with an outside party, a non-government party, business or academia or community, and you your HOD calls you for a meeting, you drop everything else. You're only accountable inwards and upwards. So all these are the kind of institutional cultural reasons that reinforce siloism and non-engagement, non-openness, non-transparency with non-government forces and sectors.
Thanks, Andrew, for that diagnosis, and clearly experience both having been in the system at one point and now working from the outside. I wonder though, when we speak about this though, and clearly there's we're speaking to our context, but it seems to be a problem. I mean, across governments in many countries, that's working in silos, and there have been attempts made to deal with that, I think, through transversal management and so on, but very much the work that Sscn has done with practitioners, through engaging with practitioners in the various reference groups, and particularly within the built environment task team, which is focused on practitioners from the various built environment sector departments, confirms what you're saying. And also, I think that this phenomenon is slightly different in the different spheres, as you've mentioned already. Jill, now I have a question that I'd like to direct towards you from the chat from Siham Sali Abrahams, where she asks what recommendations we might have for breaking down regulatory barriers to improve partnerships with and the flow of resources to informal actors.
Thanks, Danga. I don't have any clear ways of doing that other than trying to elevate communication and an understanding of the challenges. Because if government's working in silos and avoiding interacting with community organizations, which is something that we see in our work, because it's very hard and threatening, they are not aware of the actual reality on the ground. And I think that bringing people together for honest and accountable conversations about reality, a reality check, is the first step. And as we saw in the food forum, when issues were raised and government officials were attending in a spirit of listening, they went away and tried to find solutions to things. And it's easier to avoid acting and responding if you can safely avoid connection. So I just think that's the first step, getting people together to have a very honest appraisal of where the blockages and problems are and what could be done about them.
Mm-hmm. Duncan, can I just come in here as well, if you don't mind? And because Jane has put up two important points, the question of political will and the lack of imagination on potential, of doing things differently or considering doing things differently. And I certainly agree with both of those. I mean, political will at a senior level tends to be obsessed with chances of re-election, and political will at the sort of ward councillor level, and a few other people on the chat have alluded to this, the obsession of ward councillors to act as gatekeepers. Anything that moves in their area has to go through them, and we've had experience of this time and time again. It adds no value, and it paralyzes any real fast-moving initiatives, so it dampens development. The lack of imagination is reinforced by this terror within many of public sector institutions of getting it wrong. Absolutely terrified, the officials who are trying hard, but if they don't get the internal processes and procedures correct, from the decision making to the paperwork and things like that, they are terrified of getting a legal challenge from somewhere else, or falling foul of internal audit and internal forensic investigations. And these processes in a divided administration, which has happens time and time again, can be weaponized against them by their own colleagues or by counselors. And so the institutional culture again becomes the reason why nothing gets done, or there is no imagination to do things in different ways. And we have to raise, and the report that you referred to, the PARI report that Cities Network is working on, we've got to deal with the institutional culture. Changing the law is not going to really help if we don't change the institutional culture.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think that truism that's become a cliche. What is it? That culture eats strategy for breakfast. I think, I think very much applies, and it really is. It will be a challenge to address that. Before we move forward, though, let me see. We have the poll results have come in. Let me just share those with everyone. So, what are the main challenges to collaboration between government and civic organizations? We see the biggest responses from is 52% who say that it's due to a lack of understanding of either government systems or community dynamics, and then followed by 42% who say it's because of administrative barriers, 10% limited access to resources, power dynamics up at 39%, as well as limited community engagement, skills and capacity. I think that's it's interesting that we had only 39% saying that the power dynamics were an issue, because I think that is one of the fundamental issues underpinning that particular statist relationship we'd spoken about earlier. That politics and society and policy is about power at its core in many ways, and those people who are powerful within the system are able to or at least get their way rather, and those who have less power are disempowered from doing that. The next question 2, which was, have you supported organizations aimed at curbing food insecurity? Well, this is heartening to see, because we have 71% of respondents saying that they have been actively involved in supporting organizations and communities during the pandemic. I mean, I think, yes, just putting it out to Andrew and Jill, I mean, my sense has been very much that this has been informally among friends, among groups of people have been speaking to it a lot. And does this reflect your experience as well?
Danga, I would say that this civic response to COVID has been incredible. And the data that we've collected via the Food Forum just shows the scale of response, the collective response. So that data report is quite interesting reading if anybody's interested in that.
Great. Thanks, Jill. And I think this goes back to the crisis, and I'd like to present into this discussion later on when we speak as well, is that, what is it about crisis that makes us so suddenly become active citizens? Suddenly we move from the roles that we would normally occupy, the jobs we'd normally do, and do things differently. And that's definitely one of the things that we'd like to leave with today, is some better sense of what we might do and what lessons we might learn from crisis. Moving on to the third poll questions, we have, what do you think of the main challenges, rather, to reducing food insecurity in South Africa? And the most overwhelming response is that it's due to a lack of resources and resource support, financial instability at 29%, and poor awareness of the food security crisis at 39%. That's an interesting finding. Would you say, based on your experience, that a lack of resources is a big issue in terms of food security, not just in the crisis perhaps, but even prior to it? Andrew?
Danga, it's interesting. I would possibly take issue with that finding. I mean, certainly during the crisis, there was no lack of resources. But looking at how we shift from short-term food relief to longer-term food systems and nutrition systems change, I think it's because, firstly, a lot of people don't see the system. They see only parts of it. And part of doing systems change is to reveal the system, the whole system, to all the participants in that system. so different, departments of agriculture will focus on food production, usually in kind of agricultural rural areas, maybe a little bit on urban agriculture, but they won't look at whether people can consume that food. In fact, they almost promote the export of food to earn foreign exchange. They'll look at the production side. They won't look at the consumption side, right through to the other end of the system, which is looking at food waste and recycling it and things like that. And I think then you get scattergun approaches in different parts of the system. And I think one of the barriers is people not working across that system and looking at the points of leverage in the system that we have to collectively tackle. And so what are the conversations with the big multinational food producers? What are the conversations with the vertically integrated food companies, and things like that? I'm not clear on how we intervene in the system in those two areas, for example.
Mm-hmm. There is, thanks, Andrew. There is a comment here that builds on that also from Jane Battersby, where she says, on this question 3, the poll question 3, there's clearly an issue of political will, in brackets, having sat through the national government departments on the HSRC seminar last week, and a lack of imagination on potential points of intervention, which I think, your presentation and our discussions today have definitely suggested that lack of innovation, lack of imagination, perhaps lack of innovation has been a challenge. Can I ask you, Jill, perhaps to address a further question that we have here, and building on the question of informality. So Lucy Klubi asks Jill, what is the best approach to deal with informality? She says this is a challenge across the sectors, and government's attempts to formalize these sectors is not bearing fruit. And says, should government not adapt itself to meet people where people are at?
Thanks, Danga. So my response was that whether government should or shouldn't, whether they should doesn't mean they will. And I think this refers back to Jane's point as well. And the only response that I would suggest is that by making the needs and requirements and challenges of the informal economy clearer to the government officials is a way of making those adjustments. So in our recovery project that I mentioned earlier, we had measurement, sort of monitoring and evaluation requirements from Western Cape government that was impossible to fulfill. And it was only by doing the project together that they realized this was not an approach that they could take. And then the challenge was, how do you change what you've set down in a project? And that is the official's biggest challenge, because once it's cast in stone, it's almost impossible to change. And this comes back to your actions are largely dependent on what you value. And if you are valuing the evaluation indicators of success that you've put into your project plan over the reality on the ground, you're not going to get the action you require. So I just think that by highlighting the actual reality and getting people to meet on site is the fastest way to get people to change the way they behave within government. I'm sure, Andrew, you'll have something to say about that.
Well, I'm trying to, there's a couple of other questions coming through, which I'm trying to incorporate into this. And is it Karen Bin Zeev? When you get, how do you shift institutional culture? Do you think the partnerships forged through the Food Relief Forum can begin to shift institutional culture? What else needs to change? And Roland Hunter asked the question, well, how the hell do you change institutional culture? So these are difficult questions, but I think, firstly, when officials participate in partnering processes, it starts changing culture. They relax, they become less afraid, they become of being attacked and having to be defensive. And particularly when you step out of kind of dialogue and step into action, you build trust in action 10 times faster than sitting around a table. So you almost need to go and do something together and then come back to talk about it, rather than talking about it and talking about it and talking about it, and perhaps jockeying for positions and sort of trying to score points. So in that sense, we are firm advocates of stepping into action. Do something together, build trust in action, and then come back to perhaps discussing the bigger picture. And Roland, I mean, it is possible to create some safe spaces within institutions that are quite overbearing, but sometimes it's not possible, and you've got to almost help officials to step outside of those institutions. And again, that's why setting up partnering processes, forums, partnerships allows them to escape the oppression of the institution that they are laboring under, and to work in a different way, albeit for a short period, and realize that change is possible. Because when you're suffering under compliance and the rules of the institutional game in the public service, it's very hard to see any other way of doing it. And you almost got to physically be removed from the corridors of power. And I think the other way that we've tried to do it is where you can get agreement upfront on something is going to be an experiment. In other words, the indicators are going to be slightly different from the normal, almost teleological government preset goals that you've got to meet come hell or high water. And it's often called a pilot project. I mean, that's the government name for it. But I think if you agree upfront that a project is going to experiment, and you're going to learn from it, and you're building that learning process, and one of the outcomes is learning, then it creates that space for institutional culture change. But you've got to do it quite consciously at the start of a process. You can't tag it in at the end of it.
And thanks, Andrew. And I think to add to that, I mean, the sense I'm getting is it really is about, in many ways, about people getting out of their offices and actually really working with the communities at this coalface that ostensibly local government, developmental local government is all about. I think two things that you reflected on at the beginning, I think that really struck with me in terms of how also that engagement might work is two things. It seems to me at the scale, I think one of the other sort of problems of the status approach is we tend to think of things large scale. You know, if you push a button here, then, you know, all the wheels will start working and things will start happening. But it seems to me that part of the success of this approach, and perhaps you could reflect on this, is that it is at the local level, and the scale is much smaller, which enables you to deal with the local context in a very particular way. People generally are all part of that same community at that local level, and you'd think that would be what would drive local government all the time. But also, I think the approach to innovation, to adaptive governance. So the administrators are thinking in an adaptive way and being flexible, but also that they're connecting and allowing for that flexibility and being open for it, which seems to happen when they're out of those particular institutions. But also, I think action-oriented. I think you know, moving from the talking, moving from the policy, moving from the what would be nice, to actually just try. And I think also risk, and in that trying, I think is to risk failure, because I think also there's a sense, particularly when you have, as you say, a kind of intellectually minded policy apparatus, that everything's been thought through and therefore it must be perfect. But then, as you say, not just the audit fear of risk, but even in terms of trying something out, in terms of just try something small and see what happens. Give it a go. If it doesn't work, you can always do something different. And I think when the scale is smaller, it perhaps makes also that fear of failure a little less.
Danga, can I make an addition here? I think that going onto site and the fear that officials have in doing that is also largely linked to the silos, because officials going on site and engaging with communities, it raises the threat of being asked to resolve issues that those officials have no mandate over. So it's very important to make sure that a whole of government approach is taken, and bringing the right people into that engagement, so that it isn't that one official then has to face a barrage over a whole range of issues that they have no control over. And I think that's a good way to deal with the fear of engagement make sure that there's a joined up collective response so that answers can be given when questions are raised.
Mm.
But Dunga, can I just add to that? I mean, in our experience, officials at a municipal level are hugely disempowered by the politicians over time, unfortunately. I mean, last week we were working on a technical site visit to a particular community with some officials, just to go on site. And the ward councillor heard about that and said, you don't come into my area without coming through me and my office, and what are you doing? And then the sub-councillor chairperson heard about it and says, well, similarly, you don't come through into this area. And these are their own officials in their own administration, you know, and it just paralyzes the process. It makes sorting out and being responsive to community needs and engaging openly. You know, basically the line is, you do not talk to community people unless you go through the politicians. It's just unacceptable, but that's the culture that we've got, and it's across all political parties. It's not confined to one. And the other thing that we found that paralyzes progress is, in a sense, there's understandably the need for equitable treatment of citizens, given discrimination in the past. There's a need for fairness and the need to avoid any legal and political challenges that something that you're doing is unfair. The trouble is that translates into a very crude approach. It's kind of one size fits all across the whole ward or the whole sub-council or even the whole municipality, versus nuanced differentiation at a neighborhood or a precinct or a street level. And that dealing with that detail is almost impossible in our experience for much of the public service.
Mm.
So it's easier to say one co-op per ward or one industrial area per township or whatever, you know, very crude sort of interventions, most of which don't usually work because they're very top down.
Mm. Mm. Yes, I think that is the I think that's an excellent observation, I think, and really it would seem to me also that I think if practitioners are able to get out more and engage, that I think these realities, which are, I think it's almost as if the reality of being on the ground is no longer as apparent to people because of the way the system has been set up to allow them to appreciate these nuances and the little tweaks that need to be made. Not just across the system, but even within the jurisdiction of a particular municipality. Andrew, your comments though about the ward councillors and perhaps some of those dynamics around the ward system. I mean, some of our work and a lot of research has been done around the non-functioning of ward committees and their capture by particular interests in some instances. And the various politics, so they no longer perhaps achieve their goals, is known. But I wonder also if there's a question here in the chat speaking to intermediary organizations themselves, and is in your experience, have intermediary organizations become gatekeepers at some point? Is there a way to prevent that happening too within those organizations?
Anyone, I mean, anyone can become a gatekeeper if they don't subscribe to the values of radical transparency and radical accountability. Because if you're trying to do deals behind the scenes, you can easily slip into that role of being a gatekeeper. And you know, whether it's the transfer of resources via NGOs or to informal sector or anything else, you know, a ward councillor can easily become a gatekeeper. A community forum recognized by the municipality can also become a gatekeeper, because they can also say nothing moves in our area without coming through us. And that's not necessarily just about quality control, it's about control. You know, so I think that we need to go back to the values of building a capable state and doing development differently. And some of the values, not all, but some are accountability. What is it? And two-way accountability, mutual accountability, not just you are accountable to me because I'm the elected chief around here, or the boss, or the appointed official in charge of this municipal depot, or anything like that. And so a notion of ruling rather than governing. And then transparency. And I know, speaking to colleagues like Edgar Peters at Africa Center for Cities, they're working on these notions of radical transparency, which is allowed by new digital systems. So you can track where's the money going, where the resources going, where the contracts being signed, where the leases being signed, and who's getting what. And you can publish it, and it almost becomes a way of tracking the flow of resources in the system, or the lack of flow of resources to certain parts of the system.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think to take up on that, I do think, and I agree with you very much, that I think radical transparency is incredibly powerful as a means to ensure accountability. And as you pointed out earlier, I think that bottom-up accountability has not been, has definitely been a casualty of the last 20-odd years of local government. And I think one of the, if we draw the parallel to municipal finances, for example, in fact, South Africa scores very highly in terms of transparency in budgetary processes, in terms of reporting on expenditure and revenue and so on, across all spheres of government. And there are sites from the National Treasury, such as Municipal Money, where this information is readily accessible. But what's very interesting is, and I think this was pointed out by David Savage on a Municipal Money webinar a couple of weeks ago, is that despite all of that, that transparency, which is, world standard transparency, is that it hasn't translated yet into, with the exception of a few notable organizations, of course, like the Public Service Accountability Monitor and others, into the ability of citizens to hold government to account on expenditures made in their name. And I wonder if some of that disempowerment might be due to perhaps this digital divide, or perhaps the disempowerment of having the status narrative where citizens sort of give up their hands. But I'm pretty certain, and I'm pretty sure that communities would have, if we could capacitate them greater to achieve this kind of accountability, it would make a tremendous difference. I just wanted to read into, before moving on, I just wanted to read into the discussion a comment from my colleague, Kayla Brown, who in fact heads up the Built Environment Integration Task Team work. And she says that, through the work of the task team, we agree with what Andrew's saying, is that institutional culture is changed by doing things differently, no matter how small. It is easier when there's a strong network of professional support that can provide a safe space for doing this. And I think their experience has been, when you have, at least within the administration itself, something like a reference group, which to an extent takes practitioners out of their day-to-day space, but into a safe space where they're interacting with people whom they trust, then they're able to do that. I see another question here in the chat that I'd like to bring in. During the crisis itself, maybe we could speak to the crisis and some of your thoughts, Jill. What is it about this crisis that you think has made things different? Or what is it about your particular experience in the crisis, or crises more generally, that enables organizations, enables the state to behave differently? And is that something that we can harness for the future?
I think one aspect of the response that we saw was, with lockdown, people had time to get involved. I'm not talking about people who are already doing work within food relief and food systems, but a lot of people had more time to see what was going on and how they could get involved. And I see this comment from Christina saying COVID has shown that communities are far better at organizing themselves than they're given credit for. I think suddenly people were seeing the incredible work that communities were already doing and linked to that and supported that. And I think this comes also to the need to highlight the work that people do that isn't valued and isn't measured. I think that the danger with people going back to work, the danger is things fall away and things go back to the way they were. So that is the question for the group. How do we build on this and go forward in a positive way, and without the panic driving everybody to make a big effort? As they get more comfortable, perhaps post-COVID, how do we maintain this different way of doing things? That's the question we all need to answer.
Danga, can I add to that? I mean, you know, it came through time and time again when you, for example, dealing with community kitchens, which on the whole are kind of spontaneous responses to the crisis of hunger at a micro level in communities. And fortunately, what happened certainly in Cape Town and the Western Cape is that they were able to get support from larger intermediary NGOs that could raise the funds, get the bulk donations, channel resources, access the food vouchers and things like that to the micro. Our government would never have been able to do that. I mean, we even had the experiences where government warehouses got donations, but once it's in the government system, let's say from farmers, bags of apples or bags of potatoes, they couldn't get it out because once it was registered as a donation to government, they had no ways of then getting it to communities. So we just went to those farmers and said, please give it to these 10 NGOs who between them distribute to 400 other micro NGOs, and it went out within 24 hours. So an official looking at this would say, oh my God, those organizations are not registered. They're not on my books. How can I transact with them? And they're not producing data of how many people they are feeding. Meanwhile, they're not producing data because they're feeding people. You know, they're solving a crisis. So the whole mindset of government was continuously exposed, and those officials that were able to step beyond that and respond to the amazing work at a community level and just say, go for it, and we're here to back you, and let's make a plan. They were the officials that added huge amount of value into the system. And there were many officials. I don't want to knock public sector, because we found a lot of officials stepped out of their skins, stepped out of their mandates, stepped beyond their silos, and did incredible things working with community organizations and NGOs and faith-based organizations and things like that. So it wasn't all doom and gloom. Now, come post kind of lockdown, post-COVID, are they going to go back to the same old, or are they going to also be part of doing things differently with civil society or private citizens and farmers and things like that?
I think that's a good point, and brings in a nice segue from a comment here we have from Miriam van Donk, which says, a significant number of food activism and community kitchens come from individuals rather than CSOs or CBOs. This may in part account for why there was less static between actors in addressing the food crisis exacerbated by COVID-19. And then she then asks, is it realistic to see this as a sustainable approach? Would you like to comment on that, Jill?
I'm not sure what the answer is there. I do think individuals stepped up. I think that it takes a lot out of individuals to do this kind of work, and they need support and they need resources. And it does worry me that it isn't sustainable because it is so exhausting and it is so unrecognized and unrewarded. And a lot of people raise the issue of stipends for community workers who are working flat out full time, but get no reward for what they do. So I think there are networks forming, and I think that Cape Town Together has showed the potential for individuals to work together around shared goals, but there needs to be some support to make it a more sustainable model. And I don't know what the answer is. Maybe people have some input there.
Well, Danga, you had a paradox here. I mean, if I look at it in the big picture, the crisis hit, the lockdown commenced, and hundreds of thousands of paid civil servants were sent home for good reasons, you know, at the start. And at the same time, certainly in Cape Town, 30,000 unpaid volunteers came out of their homes and hit the streets to feed people. and to do all sorts of other things, to make masks and distribute them and things like that. So it is a bit of a paradox where one half was paid to stay at home and obviously keep the system ticking over, but often not doing their daily job, whereas thousands of community volunteers worked for nothing. And it's not that everyone, I mean, so I think linking it to what the presidency has been putting on the table around social employment for public benefit work becomes an important part of the equation. And certainly one of the projects that we've put in for, and I don't know if the budget is going to come through in the Minister of Finance's final calculations in 2 weeks' time for social employment, because there's still a big debate about that. But for example, we would like to see one social employment job per kitchen times 400 to sustain the initial voluntary response, because you cannot sustain levels of private donations and levels of volunteerism beyond the kind of the first 3 or 4 or 5 months of a crisis. You've got to go back to some sort of more systemic way of dealing with these things because people just run out of puff and run out of resources. And social employment for public benefit becomes a way of addressing that. And I think that's the building that relationship around social employment between community-based organizations and the state becomes the next phase of what we need to do as part of the recovery plan.
Yes, I did see mention of that. I think that really is would be a great way to take this forward, because I think there's also, it fits within that broader discussion of whether, of expanding beyond just providing grants, but actually providing employment. So you can also pay someone to work as opposed to a direct transfer that might well be a grant. And I think gives people greater ownership of a process, and also I think is probably more empowering in many ways. And let's hope that the budget that we hear, the speech, I'm not sure if it's going to be next week after the extension that the Minister of Finance has asked for, may we'll have some indications in that direction. Down to perhaps a more pragmatic question. This has come in from Megan Houston Brown. And it's asking, and this is around a broader question about climate finance and adaptive governance, would be to say, given current highly compliant oriented planning, what are some process or relationship indicators that can begin to be inserted? So I think the broader question, linking back to what we've spoken about, is could we insert relationship indicators into the KPIs of municipal officials? I know this has come up in the Built Environment Task Team, for example.
Danga, perhaps I can answer this, because we've been working with the Sustainable Energy Markets team at the City of Cape Town, trying to share their carbon neutral message 2050 within the City of Cape Town. And it really comes down to agreeing on shared goals and not seeing different projects as separate actions that are not related to each other. And this comes back to the question of silos and the interests of particular teams. I mean, it is astonishing that different teams are competitive around who gets to decide on these things, whereas we're talking about carbon neutrality. And the struggle to relate these goals across the different city departments. And that's only within the City of Cape Town. It's not even across province and citizen organizations. So it is about having those conversations and getting shared goals and agreeing to be a bit more humble about territory and hierarchy and silos.
I think that
I can just add to that. I mean, Megan, firstly, it's not a dull question or pragmatic question. It goes to the heart of it, because you either are subscribe to and are part of a top-down hierarchical command and control environment, or you practice adaptive leadership and adaptive management. They don't go together, and you've got to carve out some space. So you know, in addition to what we've been doing with that sustainable energy markets team, we've also been doing some adaptive management masterclasses via the resilience unit more broadly, and getting people to see the system. I mean, Jane Battersby wrote a report in 2014 for the city on food. You know, it's not, and she said, it's not going to work, and I quote Jane here, if it's department by department, project by project implementation. That is the worst thing, and yet that characterizes 95% of implementation by government. And people always wonder why implementation gets stalled or doesn't work or doesn't have the required effect. And it's because it persists in being department by department, budget by budget, mandate by mandate, project by project, separate from everything else. And so adaptive management first says, well, what's the system that we're dealing with here? How is it joined? And how do I go beyond my own mandate, which I control, to being able to influence other people's mandates? I'm talking about within the administrative system now. One could also apply this more broadly in the system. And adaptive management goes to how you influence things that you don't have direct control over. And you can't influence other institutions, other leaders, other people if you're not in a relationship with them. You cannot command and control influence. You maybe can command and control the people and the budgets that you have control over, your so-called mandate, but you can't influence unless you are in relationships. And it goes back to the need for everyone to build relationships in the system, because otherwise you will not influence how they spend their budgets or where they put their priorities or how they take their decisions. That's why we are so insistent that relationship building comes first.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Andrew. I think that's a really good point in which to bring the contributions both from you and Jill, which have been insights have been tremendously useful. I think the comments we're seeing in the chat suggest that people have definitely been stimulated by your experiences in this specific instance, but also the broader lessons that we are extracting from that particular experience around adaptive management, adaptive governance, but also some of the systemic problems that we face that affect the delivery of a better life, for want of a better term, to citizens, not just in moments of crisis, but also throughout and all the time. And I think it's worth pointing out as well, and I think this would be a fair thing to say, and it's emerging very much from the work we do at Sscn, is when we look at that systemic question, it's not to blame individuals, because I think there are many people, many practitioners within the system doing their very best within trying circumstances, precisely because of the way the system is set up to achieve some of the goals that our society would like us to achieve. With that, we're coming and have just gone a minute over time. So let me bring this session to an end. I'd like to thank all of you for participating and for making this your first order of business on a Monday morning. And in these times we find ourselves, COVID-19 has brought governance to the fore, and how governance respond to the challenge is a preoccupation of not just those of us who study government, but all citizens indeed. And the 1998 Local Government White Paper placed developmental local government at the center of efforts by the state to reverse apartheid inequalities and improve the quality of life by South Africans. But I think, as this discussion has shown, 25 years into democracy, and despite clearly defined authority, bureaucratic legitimacy, and fiscal independence, there's some problems in the system. And the perception, which is indeed based on reality of citizens, is that cities have failed to motivate and to galvanize stakeholders to achieving the whole of society approach. This session has been recorded and will be posted on the Facebook page for the South African Cities Network, also on the website for the Urban Festival, www.urbanfestival.co. We encourage you to share that link for perhaps colleagues who weren't able to join, and also please to continue the conversation. I think you can, of course, Google the contact details for the Western Cape Economic Development Partnership. Andrew and Jill, thank you very much for your participation, and I'm sure you'd be open to being contacted, as we would also myself at the South African Cities Network, to continue the conversation. So I'd like to wish you the rest of a good week, and the ongoing Urban Festival, which continues through the end of the month. So please check the festival website for additional interesting discussions you can be part of. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Danga.
Thanks, Danga, and everyone.